Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today on the podcast, I'm joined by my partner at Art of Procurement, Kelly Barner. Hey, Kelly, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Phil. How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks. And we wanted to do this a little bit different podcast this week to talk about this idea of 10x procurement. We've been talking about this quite a bit internally at Art of Procurement, and so we thought now was a good time to share a little bit about what we're thinking and why we really believe in this notion of 10x procurement for our profession.
Well, and the interesting thing really is both in terms of what this means for us as a team. As you mentioned, we've been talking about this internally, but then it's also something that we're hoping to bring the whole community into. And this really dates from sort of an inspirational concept that you brought to the team. You and I and Brittany and Helen were all together in the Boston area in May. And this was something that you introduced at that point to create an internal challenge for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I personally did really connect with the idea immediately. So maybe kind of take everybody through the same way you introduced the idea to us and what it really means in your mind.
Yeah, so the idea of 10x procurement, and we think about it, as I'll talk about it here, is really as it applies to the procurement profession rather than as it applies to Art of Procurement, because we're actually looking at it from both perspectives. But as it applies to the procurement function, really from the start of Art of Procurement, the intent was to help procurement organizations really become or remain relevant to their organizations. And when we think about transformation in procurement, oftentimes it's really incremental. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with incremental changes and improvements. And in fact, most transformations, that's probably a safer way to drive change incrementally. But over all those years, I think what I have seen is when we think of the vision for what procurement can be, and we think about the vision within these boundaries of almost like the 10% improvement rather than an exponential improvement in what we can do. So, we have these existing guardrails around what is procurement, what should procurement be, what should our vision be, what does best in class look like, and all that can actually be a limiting factor for us. And we almost like box ourselves in to this idea of what procurement should be. And so I kind of look at procurement, and one of the ways that I think about this is actually when you think about stock charts, and if anybody can visualize a stock performance chart, that's in the Wall Street Journal, on Yahoo Finance, whatever it is, when you're looking at technical analysis of stocks, you're looking at kind of the range of a stock. And oftentimes these stocks are range bound. So you think of the top level of a stock price, the bottom level of a stock price, and over the years, it just kind of bounces between these two ranges. And I think of procurement often like that, like procurement performance. We're kind of bouncing amongst a high point in terms of our performance and our output and a low point of our output. And that's sometimes driven by macroeconomic factors. But what do we actually need to do to break out, to use the vernacular in stocks, break out of that pattern? So what do we need to jump above that band that we operate within, and think differently about what the performance is and achieve different level of performance? So that's where that kind of 10x idea for me came from, is, okay, how do we rethink what we should actually be achieving and what is the art of the possible for procurement that goes beyond this kind of traditional range that we've kept ourselves in?
Now, when we all came together, you actually shared a really cool video with us to give us not only some things to look at and some very dramatic music, which is always really nice, but there were some sort of groundbreaking examples that were in that video. I know for me, I sort of have those in my frame of reference when I'm asking myself, am I doing a 10x job? right,
Yeah.
at this task? Am I thinking 10x? What were some of the examples in that video?
Yeah, that video was something that Google had put together for their Google X kind of project, and it built on a couple of things. One is the Apollo moon program. So there was, it cut to kind of a speech of J.F.K. in 1961 where he challenged NASA to put a man on the moon and do it within the next decade. This is in the 60s. Of course, at the time that was certainly an audacious goal. It was probably beyond an audacious goal and something that nobody really knew how to achieve. But he set that goal and that target, which then operationalized NASA and really the entire engineering and scientific community within the US to put a man on the moon. And of course, achieved that in July 1969. So what, within 8 years of setting that mission. And that's really, that really speaks to me as well, because a lot of folks will know I live in Florida. We live close to Kennedy Space Center, and we often get to see kind of a lot around that mission as we go and visit. So I'm always kind of inspired by that. And the other thing was just Google itself. Google has been probably the highest profile company that has put this idea of exponentialism into practice within their business, about trying to go for these moonshots and just thinking differently, getting out of the practice of kind of the fixed mindset and to one of a growth mindset. And, when I think it was Larry Page, when he was at University of Michigan, he was in a student leadership training program. It's called Leadership, where there was often preached in this leadership program around a healthy disregard for the impossible. So kind of, again, trying to think in a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. And those two things really together, like, why can't we apply that thinking to procurement and everything that we do? Because, think about if we remove those boundaries, that I think have confined us, that box I talked about before, is that going to drive us to think a little bit differently about what the art of the possible is?
Well, and you've talked about the fact that while incremental change isn't necessarily a bad
Right.
thing all the time, it's not what we're aiming for with this. And I'll speak from my own experience. I've been in procurement long enough that what used to be program building is now procurement transformation,
Mm-hmm.
right? We took the exact same set of activities and goals and tasks, gave it a much longer, fancier name. Consultants charged more to carry it out, but effectively it was the same thing. And so as we challenge ourselves and as we challenge everyone else to join us on this 10x journey, what are some of the things that we can do to hold ourselves accountable so that, if we share a rocket ship or a NASA visual, it doesn't just become a branding exercise where we're
Mm-hmm.
taking what we were doing in 2021, sticking a picture of a rocket ship on it and
Yeah.
calling it Procurement 10X. How can we make sure it's real?
Yeah, I think that, you always need visuals to inspire. And so I think that you will always have things that help you connect with doing something differently, or this, exponential thought process. And the visuals and the branding and everything around it kind of help with that and help you get into a frame of reference, a frame of mind to think about things in a different way. But what it is really important is that it has to be tangible. So mindset is really, really important, but it has to be real. It has to be, these are ways that you can actually go and think about doing it. Because I think if it was, a branding exercise, for example, we'd have left it at that inspiration level of, yeah, procurement 10x, it's a good thing to do. We can all agree that we want to think in this way, but that's great. How do you actually go about doing something with this? And so what we're working on is, a set of principles and a roadmap and kind of the whys and the hows of putting this idea of 10x into practice. And this notion of 10x procurement is going to be very different for everybody within procurement, depending on where you sit, the organization that you're in, the maturity level of the team that you're working in, and how well respected and received they are in the business, your level of experience within procurement. So everyone's starting from a slightly different point, and 10x procurement is going to mean something slightly different to every individual and every procurement organization. However, we need the principles that help drive the roadmap to allow everybody to put it into practice, regardless of where they are on that journey.
So let's talk a little bit about the principles, and we'll go into these in more detail. But I guess just to give people a sense of the total picture that we're talking about, the six principles are to drive business outcomes, to inspire and catalyze change, to facilitate differentiated decision making, to utilize a fit for purpose operating model, to possess an entrepreneurial mindset. That's a really big one, and then to oversee 100% of spending. So that's sort of the big picture and how we're going to bring all of these things together. But do you want to start with outcomes, Phil? We've certainly talked about this a lot in events over the last year, the importance of driving digital outcomes specifically. But how does that fit into the 10X framework?
Yeah, I think that outcomes are ultimately the most important thing we do is we're driving outcomes for our business. And that really should come first. What are the outcomes that our business is trying to achieve? And how are we tying with those, regardless of what procurement's focus may have been in the past, or the way that procurement measures itself? It's like they're not how procurement measures itself is an internal measure that only procurement cares
Yeah.
about. And maybe the person that signs the checks for procurement cares about, which is why procurement cares about it. But actually, that doesn't mean a lot to the business. It means how have we been pigeonholed within a business because that's all they think that we should be achieving. When you think of cost savings as an example, so it's truly understanding the needs of the business, and individual stakeholder groups within the business, because those may be different. And then building the strategies that we can build using our external partners to drive those objectives. But what's really important, I think, is that we all come across conflict or conflicting objectives. It may be conflicting objectives between two different stakeholders of the same project. IT and HR, you may be doing a payroll, or some kind of SaaS software implementation or something like that, where you actually have conflicts between the two, or conflicts between what procurement metrics are or procurement objectives are. It's our job to mediate to a resolution, as opposed to just let everybody kind of fight about it. We need to be the ones that are actually saying, look, this is what the business is trying to achieve, and break down some of those barriers that individual stakeholders may have in actually going and achieving that. So it's more than just procurement being involved in giving up our objectives in service of what the business needs, but making sure that where there is conflict, the business is making the best decision for the business overall, rather than individual stakeholder groups.
Well, I think that's where the visual of the rocket becomes so important, because it's not intended to be easy. If you're going to have a 10x non-incremental impact, there's going to be risk, there's going to be conflict, there's going to be disagreement. It's relevant that we didn't choose for our visuals a picnic in a meadow with pretty flowers, or walking a very casual flat path on the beach. We've chosen something that visually captures not only the need to defy gravity, but truly an impact, something that it's a real struggle for everyone involved, but the ROI is so significant that it's worth the difficulty. And that, I think, probably brings us to the nature of change and the types of change that we're looking to help procurement both inspire and also catalyze.
Yeah, I mean, for us as procurement, we get such a great insight into the ability of the supply market and the changing ability of the supply market, the products and the services that the supply market can achieve, versus what the business is trying to do, the business outcomes that we talked about driving, where the part of the business that brings those two together. We're in the business of selling change as procurement. And I think we've always been in the business of selling change. So this may be something that is, a little bit more familiar to us in terms of, we're kind of used to having to do that, but we should always be looking for new ideas. I think about when we've gone through a sourcing process and the sourcing is signed, like the contract is signed, we should be immediately thinking about how can we improve upon that the next time around. And does improving upon that mean a completely different business model, rather than an incrementally better supplier, as an example? And it's on us to be thinking about how we can drive this exponential improvement in terms of how we go about achieving the outcomes, the business outcomes that the business wants to drive in new ways. And then, of course, telling the stories and inspiring the business to be interested in wanting to understand that, because a lot of time you'll say to yourself, well, that's all well and good, but my business doesn't care. Well, frankly, it's our job to make them care. And we have to figure out ways to do that, through the information that we present in front of them, but also the storytelling of how we're actually influencing change.
And I think that actually flows nicely into the next one, which is facilitating differentiated decision making. Because even though choices are being made, so for instance, procurement gathers the information, lays the qualified options in front of the business, and they're the ones that ultimately say, this is who we're going to sign with, or this is how we're going to break down the demand between these few providers. In a lot of cases, they're really just picking the incumbent supplier,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't necessarily a strategic decision. Like incremental change, it's also not necessarily wrong, but it's probably not 10x. And so if we want to have an outsized impact as procurement, we also need to provide information in a way that changes how our counterparts in the business think and approach their role, don't
Yeah.
we?
Yeah, I say all the time, when you show up with to a stakeholder for the first time, if you don't show up with either new data that is relevant, or that you've synthesized information in a different way that provides a different perspective that's relevant, if you're not doing that, then the stakeholder is never going to look at you, and the business is never going to look at you at anything but somebody who's going to help them run a process. And that's just on a very tactical level.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I selfishly like the fact that insight becomes so important in this one. And some of it is category or market intelligence. Some of it is simply an understanding of maybe the way that this particular product or service is impacting other parts of the business. But I do think it allows that conversation to continue that I know we've had, and I think a lot of procurement teams are having, around what type of category expertise needs to be maintained in-house in order to play the right role in this decision-making process with the business. We're not necessarily saying that you can only facilitate this differentiated decision-making if you are just as much of an expert in the
Yeah.
category as they are. There are other ways to look at these decisions.
Yeah, we've long talked about, when we think about procurement persona, the idea of an architect. The role of procurement as being an architect. So you're bringing together all these different the insights from different perspectives, on the supply market, on what outcomes we're trying to drive, on the culture of the business, political ramifications internally, lots of external data points. You're bringing all this together and architecting strategies based on that information, but you also can architect where you get that information from. So you're not necessarily on the hook to be able to go and be the primary source of finding this information out, but you need to know who are the right people to leverage, where you can then get access to that information, so that you're then synthesizing it for the business. Because nobody knows the business like you do. No external partner knows the business, the ins and the outs of the business like you do. However, you may be external partners, for example, that know insights that you don't have, that once you become aware of them, it makes you a lot more powerful, because you can bring those and combine those with your knowledge of how a business works to do something that's more powerful than either or, on their own.
Now, speaking of architecting,
Yeah.
there's no chance that procurement is going to be able to drive different outcomes and catalyze change and provide the insights required to make these different kinds of decisions without altering the way that we operate.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we talk about having a fit for purpose operating model, what does that mean in the context of how procurement is structured and how we function?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about procurement technology, when you talk about procurement capabilities, traditionally it goes into people process technology, and that's no different here. It's how are you combining, access to the people, and which people you need, how you get them, internal, external, location, what's the operating model that they fit within. From a process perspective, how are you building processes that are actually flexible, so that they can change based on what it is that you're buying in specific situations. So you're not just seen as being, well, you're running me through a really bureaucratic process for everything that I buy. And then technology, is all around digitization. But we talk a lot around, it's not digitizing procurement for the sake of digitizing. It's like, what's the outcome that you're trying to drive through that technology digitization? So sorry, should I say the digitization of procurement? What you're trying to drive for that is, what are the outcomes? And where are you in your maturity? Because you may be very early in your maturity journey for a procurement team, and you need something completely different than if you're very mature, just because of your ability to get investment and the outcomes you're able to drive and how you're going to improve. That's where that incremental improvement does come in when you're on that change journey, but you have to have the vision that is kind of the 10x vision. So at least you've got somewhere that you're trying to go over time. I think that's important from an operating model. But I see it's all the people, process, and technology all coming kind of together, and how are you, again, architecting a solution based on all the different things you have available to you that fits where you are right now, but also where your business is and where you're trying to go.
And that re-architecting the operating model is really like creating a startup within the company,
Right.
isn't it? It's saying, this is what we want to provide. These are the resources we have. We need to find a way to make it work with this. And so it's truly an entrepreneurial challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. And, we talk about procurement as a service provider. We did the white paper series 2 or 3 years ago called Procurement Inc., which was all around thinking about procurement as a service provider, because ultimately that's what we are. And to be successful as a service provider, we have to be entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial, inside of our organizations. And possessing an entrepreneurial mindset is that fifth principle that we built together, because when you think about this idea of entrepreneurial spirit, it's about being positive. It's about being creative, about solving problems. I think something that's really important is being accountable. I know in my career as a procurement practitioner, sometimes when things didn't go my way or when the business didn't do the things I wanted them to, I'd kind of just blame the business and say, well, they just don't understand, or they don't know what they're missing out on. Well, a really big part of this is that we have to be accountable for why they decided to do that. It's not a business problem it's not the business's problem that they avoided us. It's our problem. So how do we fix things so they work through us? And that's the way that an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur thinks, because ultimately you're driving a business, and to drive a business, you want to have as many people using you as possible, or that it makes sense to.
Now, the last of the 6 principles is to oversee 100% of spending. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I would be not asking the question that every single procurement professional is likely to ask if I didn't say, okay, why is it oversee 100% of spending and not achieve 100% spend under management?
Yeah. I kind of hate that spend under management metric that we all aspire to be as we professionalized procurement. I think you got to take a step back and realize, where should we be playing and where shouldn't we be playing, and meaning, where can we have impact and where is our impact rather limited from a strategic perspective in helping the business 10x their outcomes. And so where you decide that it doesn't make sense for procurement to be managing that spend in a traditional management way, there is nothing wrong. Like, we want to be able to oversee it. And what I mean by oversee is, we know where the spend is going. We know the channels that are being used. We're comfortable that it's being, that money has been spent in compliance, with policy and processes and procedures. But we're not saying, hey, I got to scoop all that up and bring it into procurement, and where the point of, success or failure for that spend. So overseeing is really important, but managing, not so much. Pick our spots where we're going to have the biggest impact, where the business needs us the most, and focus on that. And for those others, try and put in place self-guided buying strategies, for example, or technologies. We shouldn't be the single point of failure for all third-party spend, because trying to be that, I think, is what's led to all the perception problems we have.
I do actually think that our ability to embrace this different concept around overseeing spend is actually a silver lining of the pandemic. I remember that self-guided buying or self-sourcing had started to kind of be part of discussions even in advance of 2020. And it would always induce some level of panic
Yeah.
response. But then everybody went home to work and they kind of just started doing it. And the sky did not fall, at least not for that reason. And so we were sort of forced to embrace this change. The technology is also there to allow us to do it without loss of control or visibility. And so we can actually say, being positive about it, this is a change that started without us having to drive it. And so all we really need to do is change our way of thinking and make sure we have the right processes and frameworks in place to facilitate what's already really happening naturally.
Yeah, yeah. I think we get too stuck on managing spend as the metric of success or not of procurement. And that just again leads, it's like we're making this power grab when we're trying to bring spend under management. And I know spend under management means something different for every single company. You look at folks that often benchmark spend under management when they're doing a procurement transformation and say, oh, we've got to hit 95% spend under management or 80% spend under management or whatever the goal is. But then that means something different. Does that mean you have a category strategy in place? Does that just mean you have digital invoices in place to manage it, that you're getting the spend visibility from it? So it's something that doesn't really mean anything. So I think it's much more important to be like, if we have desires on 10xing our impact, we have to understand all the spend and where it's going and how it's being spent. But we shouldn't necessarily feel like we've got to be the one controlling everything.
And we're not just saying to everybody, hey, here's your process for 10xing what you currently do.
No.
This is, as we shared, this started with an Art of Procurement team challenge. We spent a lot of time talking about what 10x meant and ways that we can incorporate it in our own processes. And so we've spent a few months, I think, working towards this. It's going to be a journey. This isn't going to be something that, we've finished it by the end of December. It's going to be a new way of working and thinking. But I think it's important that we're asking it of ourselves first, and then we're inviting everybody to join us.
That's a really important point. It's we've built these principles based on the things that we believe. If every procurement professional acted in this way, if every procurement organization embedded these principles in what they do, that will have an exponential effect on the impact they have on their business, wherever you are in that maturity curve. However, this isn't. We talked about how it's important to have to be building the roadmap. We're seeking a lot of input as we go through this process to help collectively, the community figure out, okay, what does this mean for me and how do I go and do it? Because we're certainly not pretending to have all the answers, but we're wanting to try and help drive a conversation around 10x procurement. Do we want to exponentially increase the impact that we have on our business? Is that something we should aspire to as a profession? And if it is, and I hope that the answer is that yes, it is, that we want to do that, how do we go and do that? We want to learn from everybody within the profession who's doing things that are really interesting, so that we can collectively benefit from that and apply that to the things that we do ourselves, ultimately having these roadmaps. But for now, I think the principles are a really good starting point because they give us somewhere that we can really focus and look at and think about, am I embodying those principles and what's important about those principles? And if not, where's my gap? And it gives you something to focus on as you start on that journey.
Well, and speaking from, 3 whole months worth of experience of attempting to work this way, I think what it has ended up meaning for me on a day-to-day basis is that when I stop and look at something that I've done or something I've written or a call that I'm preparing for or advice and recommendations that need to be provided, it means certainly putting in that little extra bit of time. Always, always, always. That's the entrepreneurial thing. But it's also about keeping myself engaged.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that people would always associate Art of Procurement content and events with the highest level of quality. So we're already coming to this being people who care about the details. But that 10x non-incremental difference requires us to stop and say, I am going to care equally about every level of detail in this. And so it's taking 30 more minutes to make sure that the title of an event is really doing its best job getting the community's attention, or making sure that a podcast narrative or an AOP live narrative is really going to draw the best insights out of that specific guest or team of guests. I think we've seen the difference. I think partly it's the benefit of that exercise of stopping and consciously saying to myself, is this 10x? And being honest. And sometimes it's the things that we have the most experience in that are the hardest to
Mm-hmm.
10x, because there's so much, I don't want to say that it's rote or transactional work, but habits are so loud. Habits are so dominating. And it's when you don't actively think in the moment, how am I approaching this? How am I doing this work? That's when the 10 has the tendency to slide back down to like a 1.
Yeah.
The 0 sort of falls out of the middle. And so it's being very consciously aware in the times when you can work most comfortably because you've done something many times. That's actually when I find, for me, that's when I need to proactively put my guard up and push myself a little bit harder to make sure that 0 stays where it's supposed to be between the 1 and the X.
Yeah, that constant, because I find that too, the constant questioning yourself, is this 10x, when you're doing something, when you're responding to an email, whether you're taking a position on something, whether you're producing something, it makes you stop and think. And the answer may not be that every single time you're 10xing what you're doing, but the stopping and thinking, is this the right way to do it? I think is a really important kind of part of how you internalize this idea of you know, incrementally improving the outputs and the outcomes that you're wanting to drive. Even if you're not written on a piece of paper, I want to do, thing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Because I find myself doing that all the time as well now, and stopping and thinking. And sometimes it might not be the right situation where you need to, but most oftentimes you're looking and thinking, okay, so how can I do things differently? And then on a business perspective, you're thinking, where does that mean I invest differently? Or does that mean I do, a different product? Or does that mean we need some different technology to support what we're going to do? I think it's very interesting as you start to think like that. I'm also a really big kind of believer in the innovator's dilemma. So, how when you are innovating and you get to a point of, things are going really well and the business is going well, and you seem to be successful. And it's the same from a procurement organization, those that believe that things are going really well and they've got a great relationship with their stakeholders, and, we're kind of the top of the class and we don't really need to think about things. That's actually when you're at the most vulnerable. And so you've got to always continue to challenge yourself of how can we be better? How can we be different? Because if you don't do that, then stakeholders, from a procurement perspective, will ultimately find new ways of doing things on their own where they don't need you. Or they'll have different needs that you haven't adapted to because you really didn't keep your eye on the ball, so to speak. And that's what I see us doing in Art of Procurement every day as a result of this 10x idea, is challenging everything that we do.
And part of where the energy comes from to achieve all of this is from the collaborations that we have as a team, right? We challenge each other. It's certainly an environment where we're always experimenting with things.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying new ideas. We're seeing what works. We're looking for what creates the most value. But we're intending to expand that circle of collaboration. And we're lucky that we have amazing brand partners that tend to come to these efforts with the same dedication and sort of creative mindset that we do. So what will we be asking of brand partners that choose to join us on this journey?
Yeah, I mean, we're so big on education, as hopefully everyone who listens to the podcast agrees with. That's certainly our focus is, how can we help the whole community figure out new ways of doing things that are going to drive exponentially better results. And so that's what we're going to be challenging to the partners that we work with, and we're going to be driving it through our content of, like, what's your role as somebody within the procurement community, as a provider within the procurement community, to actually help your clients 10x their impact? Like, what role do you play? When's the best time to use your technology or your services? We've talked a lot about ecosystems and how procurement is just, going into one huge different ecosystem. Like, what's your role and how do you support the organizations that you support to 10x, not necessarily to incrementally improve what you do? And that's going to be a big part of how we're questioning the folks that we work with and trying to then help inform the community of their role in helping to 10x the impact of the community.
And then how about the community? I mean, that's absolutely one of the greatest things that Art of Procurement has going
Yeah.
for us. I think outside of our tight core team, and we genuinely enjoy working together, and we love procurement. But we also love that all of the people that we have the opportunity to engage with, whether at live events or on LinkedIn or on any of the other social media platforms, what are we looking for from the wider community?
Yeah, we're not going to 10x the impact of procurement on our own. The only
Thank
way that,
goodness.
yeah, the only way that we can do this is collectively as a community. And so the thing that I would ask, or the couple of things I would ask, join us on this mission. And what I mean by that is, as you see the content that we're sharing and the events that we're putting on and the webinars, and you've participated and heard some of the perspectives of others on how they're helping our profession or how they believe they're helping our profession to 10x our impact, challenge us. Share your ideas, share examples of where that's worked or where you feel that hasn't worked. What should 10x look like? We're looking for any and all kind of input so that we can really coordinate, collect, consolidate, synthesize all that information ultimately into some things that are really tangible that anybody can take away in whatever role or whatever organizational level of maturity a department is, to start building the building blocks to 10x our impact, and really to kind of jump the generations of procurement, if you will, going from we shouldn't think about this as in procurement, we got to do A first, then we're going to do B, then we're going to go do C, then we're going to go D. How do we go from A straight to D or E in terms of the impact that we have for those that haven't necessarily been on that journey yet? So just share with us your thoughts, your experiences, your pushback, because that's what's going to make this this mission stronger.
Now, speaking of missions, we started this conversation by talking about the inspirational roots, certainly pulling from Google, but pulling also specifically from the Apollo Moon program.
Yeah.
And first of all, I have to note, JFK, you can't have true innovation without somebody from Boston. So check mark there.
Yep.
But he didn't say, let's just see how high we can get a rocket to go.
Mm-hmm.
He was very specific. The objective is to do this ridiculous thing. We're going to put men on the moon. That is an unbelievable challenge. But the ROI associated with it, the victory, the achievement, all of the technology and the knowledge that was gained along the way was absolutely a tangible benefit for the whole world. So what is that sort of moon destination? What is the ROI for everybody that we're all going to experience for asking this much more of ourselves?
Yeah, sometimes an ROI when you're following a mission like this, much like when J.F.K. set that initial vision of, putting a man on the moon and bringing them home, it wasn't necessarily clear what all the offshoot benefits, if you will, of all the technology, for example, that was created to enable that mission. And I think you'll find some of that from, when we think about 10xing procurement, some of the ROI isn't exactly clear that you would get along the way, but getting to a point where you are exponentially more impactful than you are today, is obviously only going to be a good thing from both an organizational perspective and a personal perspective. When I think about procurement careers, we've done a lot of work on what the procurement professional of the future looks like and the procurement department of the future looks like. And I think we both kind of believers that procurement in the future will be a smaller but more impactful organization from a headcount perspective. But being so impactful will mean that more organizations will actually engage in strategic procurement. So that doesn't necessarily mean a net reduction in headcount across industry. It may mean a net reduction in headcount per business, but that those people that are in that business are focusing on a lot higher impact activities, like figuring out how to achieve the objectives and goals that we set, that a business sets to exponentially increase what they do. So I just look at this as being, if you're going through a process to challenge yourself every day, to really think outside the box, to put in practice the principles that we talked about, there is no bad thing that can come from that from your career. That's the way I always looked at it from a career perspective. Was I'd rather outsource myself because I've done some things which make my team a whole lot more efficient, and there'll be another organization that values that will bring me in to do the same for them. And start the journey again. So I'm not looking at this, thinking this is we should think about this in terms of this is going to drive a 4-to-1x ROI or anything like that at this point. I think at the moment we're in that stage of discovery, and that will become more apparent over time. How do you
Now
look at this? I'm interested in your
well,
perspective on that.
yeah, it's interesting, and I think the piece that would be easy to do, that's part of how you know it's wrong, is that to create, let's say, 10 times the content.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, I'm churning out more posts. Congratulations, everyone. You now have 10 times the things you need to read every day. But that's not it. It's about density to me. It's about coming up with maybe fewer ideas that are far more impactful and are more complex to capture and communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So, from my perspective, and where I'm so focused on the AOP lives and the written content and the ideas that we create with our community and our brand partners, I actually think in some ways, if I'm effective, I'm going to be able to look back and say, you know what, I really did write less things, but I am definitely 10x proud of what we've put out there. I'm confident I can see the types of conversations that are happening. That for me will be, let's say I take a check-in December and look back at the evidence of having worked in a 10x type of methodology for 6 months or so. I think that's what we're likely to see, because it's very easy to just sort of spray mediocre content out there,
Mm-hmm.
because the schedule governs that today a post has to go out.
Yeah.
I think the 10x is saying, is this post, is this poll, is this audio excerpt going to change the way someone approaches their job? Or am I putting this out there because it says it's Wednesday and I need to put this post out there? I don't think accepting that of ourselves is 10x. And you certainly know people would find it if they could be a fly on the wall of our Slack channels. All the time now we're having these exchanges where we're saying, was that 10x? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. That didn't feel very 10x to me now that I've done it. Or, okay, we're in a good position to do something. What would be the 10x? So 10x is not good. It's truly about great. And I like the idea that we're going to take on some tough topics. I think this moment is a huge opportunity for procurement. And I don't think any of us wants to waste it. We're going to work incredibly hard. We're really going to push ourselves, but we're going to do it together. And I think we're going to come out not only being capable of more things on the other side, but I think we're going to come out stronger as a community and a profession for consciously making this choice.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a movement that's all about the entire community. So as we said before, we're not proclaiming to be right in the things that we're putting out there, but we're trying to start a conversation. So we would love any of your feedback as we start sharing more content regarding the principles and how we feel all the pieces of the ecosystem fit in with those principles. And I can just speak about the principles one more time, just to go through them, just to remind you of what they are. So we have drive business outcomes, inspire and catalyze change, facilitate differentiated decision making, utilize a fit for purpose operating model, possess an entrepreneurial mindset, and oversee 100% of spending. Those 6 principles are really our starting point for what the mission to 10x the impact of procurement is about. Kelly, any final words as we wrap up today's episode?
Yes, everybody gets homework. I was thinking about this while we were talking, because when you challenged us to come to that team meeting, we were supposed to come with ideas for how to 10x specific things that we were already doing, or start doing things that are 10x versions of ideas we hadn't had yet. So, what I would like to hear is not only specific goals or ideas that people have about what they're currently doing to 10x, but more generally, what would 10x look like in your world? I would love to hear if people are listening to this on a device. Find us on LinkedIn, Phil and I individually, the Art of Procurement page. Find us on Twitter and post a comment, because I think we can even challenge each other to 10x our definition of 10x.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear what other people think we need to do, the approaches that we can embrace in order to get there. And I would also love to know what everybody's moon is. What is it that you're aiming for?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great challenge. It's given me some ideas for when we go and publish this episode as well, in a week or two as we record this. Now, for everybody who's listening, we will put those principles that, are really the starting point of this mission to 10x the impact of procurement. They'll be on the Art of Procurement, the show notes page for today's episode. That will just be at artofprocurement.com/podcast, and you'll find a link as you see all the different podcasts there for this one on 10x procurement. We'll also be building a specific page on Art of Procurement dedicated to 10x as a single place for all the different content and discussion that we are building around these ideas, so that it'll all be there in one place. Kelly, I want to thank you so much for joining me and talking a little bit more about these ideas of 10x procurement. I'm actually really happy that we're starting to get them out there, because it's been something we've been working on here for 3 months or so. So it's been a pleasure to start talking them out with you.
Totally agree. And I can't wait to hear from everybody else on this.
All right. Well, with that said, I want to thank you all for listening this week, and we'll be back next week. And hopefully you can add some of your thoughts to the conversation here as we really build on this mission to 10x the impact of procurement. Until next week, take care. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.